Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into something pretty intense.
Always up for a challenge. What are we tackling today?
Today, we're going deep, and I mean deep, into Akira.
Akira, a classic. Visually stunning, sure, but there's a lot more to unpack there than just the cyberpunk aesthetic, right?
Absolutely. We're talking about the philosophy, the psychology, all the stuff that makes this film stick with you long after you've seen it. And, no pressure, but our listeners are pretty sharp. They already know a thing or two about this stuff.
Sounds like a fascinating challenge. So where do we even start with a film as dense as Akira?
Well, we're in Neo-Tokyo, right? This sprawling metropolis on edge, biker gangs, psychic powers.
And then bam, Automo hits us with Nietzsche, Sartre, the whole philosophical shebang.
Exactly. It's a wild ride. But that's what makes it so great.
Right. It works on so many levels, and those levels, they're constantly playing off each other.
Okay, let's talk about Tetsuo, his transformation after the accident. It's brutal. He goes from this troubled kid to, well, he becomes almost monstrous with power.
It's a classic case of unchecked ambition, wouldn't you say? And that's where Nietzsche's Übermensch comes in.
The Übermensch, right? This idea that someone can transcend humanity through sheer force of will. So how does Tetsuo fit into that?
Well, he's driven by this urge to break free from his limitations, to become something beyond good and evil, as Nietzsche put it. It's like a blueprint for his trajectory.
Except he totally loses control.
Exactly. And that's where the tragedy lies. He mistakes power for transcendence. He wants control, but ends up controlled by the very forces he unleashes.
Which is, let's be honest, a pretty universal human struggle, right?
Yeah.
That makes you think about all those people in power who, well, let's just say they make some pretty catastrophic choices.
It's Tetsuo's story writ large, isn't it? The dangers of unchecked ambition, of letting those primal urges take over.
Okay, but we also have Kaneda. Now, he represents a totally different kind of struggle.
Absolutely. He's trying to find meaning in this world, this city that's on the brink of total chaos.
Which, if I'm not mistaken, is basically the definition of existentialism.
Exactly. Starcher argued that existence precedes essence, meaning we're born into this world without inherent purpose. We have to create our own meaning.
So how does Kaneda embody that in the film? Because, he's leading a biker gang. Things seem pretty chaotic for him, too.
True, but look at his actions. He's fiercely loyal to his friends. He stands up to authority, fights for what he believes in. He's driven by this inherent sense of purpose, even if it's not always pretty.
So it's not just about his actions, it's the why behind them.
Exactly. Kaneda's fighting to create meaning, to find purpose in a world that often seems determined to deny him that.
So we have these two characters, Tetsuo and Kaneda, and they're on what seem like totally opposite ends of the spectrum.
And yet they're both driven by a kind of inner turmoil.
Which is where things get really interesting.
Precisely. Because that's where the psychological lens comes in handy.
It's like we're looking at two sides of the same coin, right?
Yeah.
These guys are both wrestling with some serious inner demons.
Exactly. And this is where diving into a bit of Freud might be helpful.
Okay, so we're talking id, ego, superego.
The whole shebang. You can practically see Tetsuo's id running wild, right?
Well, he's consumed by these raw desires, this need for power, for recognition.
And his ego, that rational part of the mind, it's just completely overwhelmed. Like, it can't even get a word in edgewise.
It's like he's drowning in it, and there's no one there to throw him a lifeline. But it's not just power that he's craving, is it? There's this underlying pain, this insecurity that fuels his rage.
You're hitting on something important there. It's not just the power itself, but what it represents to him. Control, validation, a way to silence those inner voices.
And his superego, his moral compass, well, that's long gone.
Pretty much. It's like this perfect storm brewing in his mind, and it all just explodes outward, impacting everyone around him.
Speaking of inner turmoil, doesn't this bring us to Jung's concept of the shadow?
Oh, absolutely. That hidden, repressed part of ourselves. We all have one, by the way. It's not about being good or evil. It's just a part of being human.
But Tetsuo, he's like the poster child for what happens when that shadow takes over, right?
Well, he's definitely a cautionary tale. But remember, Jung didn't believe the shadow was something to fear or destroy. True wholeness comes from acknowledging those darker aspects of ourselves and integrating them.
Which is the exact opposite of what Tetsuo does. He lets it consume him.
Exactly, and that's the tragedy. He had so much potential, but that inability to confront his own darkness, well, it was his downfall.
So we've got Tetsuo on this trajectory of psychological freefall, but then there's Kaneda. Now, he always struck me as grappling with things in a very different way.
He's definitely got his own demons. He's forced to confront them a lot more directly. Every choice he makes, it's like he's wrestling with those internal forces.
And he doesn't always make the right choices, does he? I mean, he can be impulsive, reckless even.
No argument there.
Hmm.
But he's also incredibly empathetic, capable of real selflessness. Remember that scene where he's trying to reason with Tetsuo, even after everything that's happened?
Right. Even when Tetsuo is basically turned into this,
Yeah.
well, this force of destruction.
Exactly. Kaneda still sees the good in him, that spark of humanity that's barely flickering, and he just keeps trying to reach it.
Trying to hold on to the friend he knew, the person Tetsuo used to be.
And that's what makes Kaneda so interesting. He's flawed, makes mistakes, but he never gives up on the people he cares about. He's constantly striving, always pushing himself to be better.
It's like both of these characters are tied to such powerful visuals, too. Tetsuo, with his grotesque, ever-shifting power, and then Kaneda and that iconic bike of his. Their internal struggles are reflected in the whole aesthetic of the film.
You're spot on. And Akira. It's practically a masterclass in visual storytelling. But we can unpack all those details a bit more, because they really add another layer, don't they? Take that bike of Kaneda's. I mean, come on, it's iconic.
More than just a sweet ride, though.
Right, it's the symbol of freedom, of individuality, especially in this world where everything feels controlled, suffocating almost.
And yet, it's always getting trashed,
Yeah.
rebuilt.
Pushed to its limits.
Just like Kaneda himself, he keeps getting back up no matter how many times he gets knocked down.
Exactly. And that's the point, isn't it? It's not about being indestructible. It's that drive, that refusal to give up. It's that existential struggle we were talking about, made real, tangible.
And then there's that decaying Olympic Stadium looming over everything. It's like a monument to a past that feels totally at odds with Neo-Tokyo.
It's those broken promises of progress, you know? Like, even our grandest achievements can fall apart if we're not careful.
A reminder that civilization is fragile.
More fragile than we like to think.
And the light imagery. It's everywhere. Tetsuo's power, for example. It's blinding, beautiful, and terrifying all at the same time.
Light's a powerful symbol. Knowledge, potential, but also the potential for destruction if it's not controlled.
It can illuminate or incinerate.
Exactly. Which brings us right back to Tetsuo, doesn't it? He's so hungry for that knowledge, that power, but he can't control it. He's almost consumed by it.
It's like he's reaching for enlightenment but finds himself staring into the abyss.
And that's the heart of Akira, I think. It's a cautionary tale, definitely, but it's also about hope, about resilience, the possibility for good, even in the darkest places.
And those themes, they still resonate today. Look around. We're more and more anxious about technology, about the future.
About what it means to be human in this crazy, changing world. And that's why Akira still matters. It's not just a product of its time, it's timeless. It's about humanity, about the choices we make, the powers we wield, for better or for worse.
So as we wrap up here, what's the one thing you hope listeners take away from Akira, having gone on this deep dive with us?
A sense of wonder, I hope. Because Akira, visually, it's stunning. But more than that, I hope it sparks some curiosity to dig deeper, you know? To ask those big, uncomfortable questions about power, about who we are.
Because the most thrilling journeys, they often take us inward.
You said it. And Akira, it's the perfect vehicle for that kind of journey.
Couldn't agree more. Big thanks to you for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those big questions. And remember, the stories that matter most are often the ones that stay with us long after they're over.